Ujú. Catalina en Sao Paulo, this next thing there. Okay, I think we're ready to start.
Are you recording?
Live streaming. It is recording. Take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone on the live stream and also in person. My name is Santiago. I'm one of the people helping organize and run this event. And I'm going to be the moderator for the English language panel we have today. So first up, we're going to have Catalina Cheng, which we have right here, and who has really nice flowery works on display here. Catalina creates objects that are heartwarming, humorous, and inspire a sense of sentimentality. They use bright colors, cartoons, and imaginary creatures to evoke a daydreaming universe that rebels against traditionally serious art media and the heteronormative gaze. Full of irreverent phrases and punchy one-liners, their work is at times very literal. This is gay art made by a gay artist. But sometimes it takes on a gentler tone with messages of care and an apparent lovesickness and romanticism. Collectively, Catalina's works are an emotional record of what it's like to navigate the world as a queer Colombian Chinese first-generation American. Many of their pieces pull from traditional blue and white Chinese pottery, while others are emblazoned with Spanish adages from their childhood. Their hope is that their art incites the joy that they feel when creating it. And that's my introduction. And
Thank you
no
so
way,
much.
yeah, of course.
Hi, I'm Catalina Cheng. Thanks for introducing me something.
And share the screen.
Nice table.
Are you gonna manage it? or-
Yeah, I got it. Oh. Hi. Okay, thanks. I'm Catalina Cheng. Thanks, Angie and Felipe, for putting this event together. I'm so excited to speak with you today, share some of my practice and my art with you. And I was gonna read that bio, but I'll do it again. You can hear it again. So I'm a queer multidisciplinary artist. I'm based in Atlanta. I'm also a skater, small business owner, and I studied business at USF in Florida, in Tampa, which is where I'm from, born and raised. And I started making art and producing art when I was really young. In elementary school, I would sell my art to anyone who was interested, and I've been doing the same thing ever since, and I hope to keep doing that. This is one of my pieces. It's oops, my Tinder profile on the pot, so I'm giving you my bio and little intro, so that's some of that. So like Santi said, I make objects that are lighthearted and humorous, and I use bright colors and cartoons to evoke like my own little universe. And I include irreverent phrases, and I want to go against serious art media and heteronormative gaze. And I use my culture of Colombian and Chinese descent to inspire my art. And my work can be really literal at times, but also I use symbolism as well. But some of my symbols are like an inside joke with myself. So I have some of that in there too. Here's some of my characters. I do a mixture of sculptural and also functional work. So I'm going to show you some of those today. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I use printmaking, ceramics, photography, digital animation, video, anything I can get my hands on. But ceramics is definitely the most time-consuming one, I'll say. So that is what I'll be focusing on today. So I want to talk about ceramics as a medium. It's very, compared to like the 2D and traditional mediums, it's very tactile. I can like mold it and shape it. And I have like more of a connection compared to like digital art, like working on a tablet. I don't feel super connected to those things. I feel like I can't like grasp the work, even though I do have control and manipulation of it, but it doesn't feel real until it becomes physical. So that's something I really enjoy about ceramics. I started working in ceramics around 2014 in high school. And I've been pursuing this form ever since, and I really enjoyed it, and it definitely has a finicky temperament. Like, if anything goes wrong, it will explode, it will break, it will crack, like, it's definitely taught me so much patience and non-attachment to material things. So, I was talking to Angie and I was like, you can handle my pieces, oh, don't worry, you can break them, like, it doesn't matter. But
I mean, you don't want to break them, but you know.
but if it was someone else's work, I'd be like, be careful, be careful. But if it's my own work, I'm like, I break pots all the time, like, it's not even a big deal. Sorry to people who are on live that are seeing the back of my head. So as you can see, some of my works are blue and white porcelain and very traditional and Chinese inspired. And I feel like that comes from my grandma had a collection of blue and white porcelain growing up, and even had like blue and white porcelain wallpaper in her home. So I feel like my earliest memories are some of my biggest inspirations. And you guys seen this one, Sana Sana Kulita Darana. Who else has heard this when they were little? Like their mom said that. So yeah. So it's very like nostalgic and like very sweet. And I even tell it to my friends if they get hurt. So it's just a familiar phrase. And so these pieces are porcelain and they also have 22 karat gold luster on them. So very ornate and luxurious. Some little frogs. So when I create these pieces, I'm able to connect with my culture and follow the same processes that people have done for generations, you know. Like ceramics as a medium, it is resistant to heat, to water, to corrosion, and that's why we're able to find ceramic pieces throughout history from ancient civilizations, like thousands and thousands of years ago. So I really love the permanence of ceramic objects. They're gonna last forever, way longer than I'm gonna here. And I often think about archaeologists finding my work or historians and them trying to interpret it, and then so that's why I'm very literal sometimes, because you know how well, I just don't want it to be misinterpreted, you know. Exactly. A lot of my recent work is about queer relationships and dating and navigating those, and heartbreak and healing and yearning and pining and euphoria. So these are some more like messages of care. I've been making like horse art my whole life. I want to show you some of those pieces.
It's awesome to see how it's literally a comic.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I know this is a celebration of Colombian comics, and I'm excited that you guys are open to listening to me talk about ceramics as a medium of storytelling. So here's some horse pieces. I've been making horse art my whole life, like drawing horses during my childhood and going to horse stores and reading about them and dreaming about like brushing their hair. I've never ridden a horse, but I do consider myself a horse girl. I also don't consider myself a girl, but I've also shared this work online, and a lot of other like lesbians have united and said they were also former and current horse girls. So the horse girl to lesbian pipeline is very real. Queer representation in art and history is so important, and it's often forgotten or rewritten. And I don't want that to happen to my work. So like, have you ever heard of like same gender relationships in history being described as, oh, they were really close friends, or they were roommates, but they'll have like records of letters between each other about them holding each other in the night and things like that when it's, you know. So historians and archaeologists and things can look at very like a lot of evidence and completely dismiss homoerotic undertones. So I want this to be very obvious. This is gay art made by a gay artist, and hopefully civilizations later they will know. They will know. And I'm very fortunate I get to share my work and my experience and the intersection of being Colombian and Chinese and queer is how I navigate this world. And my art reflects exactly that experience. So I want to connect with others who relate to those communities and anyone who has felt like they belong to those minorities, and we're all able to feel like less alone. So here's some snuff bottles that I made. Also with some glue to them. I also have some stickers with that as well, so if you want one, feel free. You can grab one. And banana, social work. Hearing from students and teachers who are teaching and learning about my work is probably the highest and coolest honor for me, because it's just hard to even fathom that people that have never met me, even perceiving me, and then the fact that they're impacted by my work is just like mind-blowing. Because I share my work online and I don't get to see reactions or interact as much as in person, you know? So it's hard to like you fathom, you know? Here's some empanada, arepita, which we had yesterday if you came. Sculptural work. And as a Colombian artist, I'm acutely aware of the challenges that we face, and a lot of stereotypes are pushed on us, but we also carry a rich cultural history with us everywhere we go. It's just some close-ups of these. Well, my mom's side of the family left Colombia when it was a very dangerous time, when narco traffickers and guerrillas had taken over control of the country and had everyone living in fear. And they were facing a lot of threats of violence and kidnapping. And it took 3 years for my family to be able to migrate to the US. And they lived under constant danger the whole time. And now that they're here, they sacrificed a lot and were able to actualize their potential in the States. So I'm very grateful for that. And my mom has not been back to Colombia for over 4 years out of fear. But she would also always like tell me about growing up in Medellin and how beautiful it was and the rich culture. And I've always dreamed of going, but my parents like forbid me from going. They thought it was too dangerous and things, which I understand. They care about my safety and they left in a very traumatic time. But in January I was able to go and visit my uncle, and it was so beautiful, and it was exactly like my mom described, just like so rich in culture, and you go anywhere and you hear music in the distance and people dancing and you smell food, and it just reminded me so much of like my mom's cooking and being with my family. Like everyone feels like family there. Even here talking to you guys and like how we interact and like talking to the other Colombian artists, it feels like, oh, this is my uncle, this is my aunt, this is my cousin. So I'm proud to be part of this history and able to share this work with you guys in person. I know like during pandemic times, we haven't been able to meet face to face, and I've been just home alone for many days at a time, and it gets hard, and it's a dark time for a lot of people, and it's hard to feel motivated to create things, but something that like keeps me going is interacting with other people online and them telling me how they're connected with my work, and that just motivates me to keep creating. Some sculptural work. So yeah, I'm just able to create art that connects with all my cultures and hopefully resonates with you guys. And I just love how ceramics reminds us of the enduring power of creativity and our shared human history. And I hope that my art gets to bring that tradition through. Porcelain. Most of these are porcelain, but some are stoneware, which is very finicky. Stoneware is more strong, but porcelain is very delicate. for taking the time to listen and check out all of our art. We can feel free to touch the
So I have to like bring the cursor.
I love how cute this is.
Oh, wait, this. Like double of me. Felipe, can you help me out?
Yeah.
I like have
It's this
myself
one.
on the screen.
Yes, it's fine.
Oh,
Can introduce Camilo when he starts touching.
okay,
Yeah, I think that you actually had around.
okay, so Camilo, you can unmute because we'll start
For
your,
me, I'm really.
you're part of the discussion. I think people are getting snacks, but I can start the intro. Okay. All right, so next up we have Camilo Aguirre. And his presentation is going to be about creative process in the making of the documentary graphic, What Remains. Spanish, proceso de creación en la novela gráfica, What Remains. And for a little bit of an intro, just find it. Camilo Aguirre is a graduate of the Instituto Departamental de Bellas Artes de Cali and obtained his master's in audiovisual script creation from the International University of La Rioja and is a graduate of the MFA in Visual Studies. I got lost for a second. From the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. He has published graphic novels such as Calidez Aislada and Ciervos de Bronce, Caminos Condenados, La Palizúa, Recetario de Sabores Lejanos, Our Voices Carried Us Here, and What Remains. Camilo has been an instructor in drawing and printmaking at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design from 2020 to 2021, and was an artist in residence at the Minnesota Center for the Book Arts. He has also been a winner of awards such as the Premio de Caricatura Fiesta de Bogotá, Las Becas Locales de Creación de Cali, Premio Intervenir a la Historia. In his work as an artist, Camilo implements the language of comics in documentary format and juxtaposed image systems to reflect on the image and the relationship between the anecdote and the social and historical reality. And that's the intro, and then you can continue on from there, Camilo.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this. Yeah, so I make comics, and I lived in Minneapolis for a while. I do have a presentation, but it's just like a scattered. I don't know. I don't feel like I would like be able to talk about something like super academic, but I mean, I researched some things for my thesis, but it was mostly like the book called What Remains. What can I tell you? My first graphic novel published was almost like my first comic, and it's called Calidez Aislada. And I would say like half of my career is thanks to Pablo Guerra, because he actually like was like one monitor or like a coordinator for this project, along with the editors from this publishing house, which was like part of the like grants that the city of Bogota would give. And yeah, my undergrad was in fine arts, and there were not many comic artists back then, so I took like everything that they didn't like in that like in the school at the time, and I decided to do that. So it was very conceptual in the sense of like conceptualism from the 50s, like non-objectual art and that kind of stuff. So I decided to do like the opposite, like to be narrative, to be illustrative, to be literal, to be I don't know, like everything, and that ended up being comics. Calidez Aislada is just like a bunch of stories from people I knew in the neighborhood I was living in. Yeah, I just like would carry like a little notebook and take notes about like things that happened in the neighborhood. And then I made a fictional graphic novel about like three I don't know if couples, but yeah, like three couples in Bogota. One of them is like a couple of teenagers who want to become like independent by stealing from uh, one of their parents, or no, an uncle actually. And the other story is like a couple of yeah, like a German couple that is in Bogota. And actually, I forgot about the last one, but yeah, it's all about that. And with that, I decided to keep taking notes and making comics about the stories that I heard, because that's easy for me. It's not, I don't know, it's hard to be a script writer. So I ended up like taking notes about my dad, who I didn't see for a long time because he was a union's leader or activist or whatever. And he was like on the run for some years. So there's like uh, blank spaces in his life that I didn't have. So I was living with him, and I mean, I am again. Uh, and he was like telling me like stories about the union and how they did things, and I was like, this is interesting. And I found out like I would say that every couple years I realize things that are like super obvious, but for me they are like, wow, this is amazing. And it's like not like, it's like they're fine as images, but they are like pretty obvious if you if you actually research or look at Colombian history or whatever. And the thing that I discovered was that anecdotes usually uh, have like alternative versions of uh, the the actual history or the official history of Colombia or any country. If you ask people like about their anecdotes, you will find like different positions that can sometimes like defy uh, official narratives, right? So with this one, I had the like stories of the persecution of unions workers and all the kind of stuff. So I ended up making a graphic novel called Siervos de Bronce, and it was my first documentary graphic novel. And I really like that format of like nonfiction comics and anecdotes that persisted, because anecdotes are fun and they can create like uh, empathy from the audience, and that's cool. So after some time, they called me, and by they I mean Pablo. He called me for this book called Caminos Condenados, which was a book about a couple phenomena that were going on in the region of Montes de Maria, where there was like dispossession caused by like multinationals, but also like the actual government were like dispossessing the population of that region that had been affected by a lot of violence before, like massacres and that kind of stuff. And now there were like even more new kinds of violence happening in total like impunity. And we decided to make a book about this with Diana Ojeda and Henry Diaz and uh, Paulo and myself. So I love this book because I was part of the research team, and it was weird to feel like you, as an artist or whatever I am, like a person that draws things, uh, can be a researcher and can affect reality or make something visible for like the rest of the population, and help, I don't know, like at least claim for justice in any uh, thing that is like regarding reality, or or the material conditions of people. So I love this book, and it was amazing. And for with this, I was like, okay, so documentary comics are something that is really, really cool, and I have the chance to show things and to make them visible. So I started. This was a project that lasted like nothing. Uh, so in this project, I would exchange like stories from people about like historical events, and for drawings. Like, hey, I need a portrait of my grandpa. Okay, but can you tell me about a story from your hometown? And they were like, okay, so my grandpa was shot in the ass by a priest. And I was like, okay, so tell me about this. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, and the thing with documentary formats is that you can like actually go back and fictionalize or exaggerate or, and I could joke with him because he was my friend. So I can, in the end of this story, for example, I'm telling him like, so a priest blew your granddad's ass, right? So he was like, oh God, yeah, I guess. So I ended up like making these kind of things, but this is from the 9th of April, right? When they killed Gaitan. So it's a very important time. And there's not a lot of documentation about priests shooting from the roofs, shooting people from the roofs, if they were something like red or because they were like liberals versus conservatives in the streets. So it was important and it was a nice story to draw. And yeah, that's like one of the things that I like doing in my comics. Then they called me from the National Museum of Historical Memory with Pablo, right? And we made a book about La Palisua, which is part of something called symbolic restitution. Symbolic restitution is like when there's been violence towards a community. The only restitution shouldn't be like money or land, or also there should be like an opportunity for the community to speak up or to be visible with the rest of the population. And this was part of it because this community was dispossessed many times in the same region. Like they would like take their houses, like with death threats, and would like kill them. And whenever they returned, the government or companies or whatever would like dispossess them again. So it's like an intergenerational story about how these people and their children came back to their town to claim it back. So it was again a very nice project. In this time, like the main researcher was a lawyer, so she was the one that helped me like understand like the legal aspects of this, and I enjoyed this a lot. And then we made a book. It's nice because I'm like showing you like sketches, and that's like the process that I had back then. This one was about like how food equals material conditions, to not to say politics, because in some regions the way the fish you cook with depends of how contaminated the river it is, right? Or yeah, so this was a story about that. And I think like many of the people that is like participating that are participating in this symposium or in these panels have participated also in this book, because it's about like this idea of like how food is not something neutral, right? It's not like something that we should preserve, but it's something that we should like think about. So yeah, now I go to my like the book that I was gonna talk about. I spent all my time like introducing myself, but I still have 10 minutes. Okay, so I went to the US with a huge debt that I'm still paying to study my MFA. Because I wanted to be like this research artist. I wanted to be like, okay, so what if I do something and I am the research and I do everything, because I can be like the scriptwriter too, and I can like I have so many stories that people have told me because I have been there as the illustrator, right? And I want to do that. And I got these stories. Zach Sally was like my mentor back then in the MFA. He didn't understand anything. He was like, what is this? And I was like, it's about the history of Colombia. And I have like these really valuable stories from interviews to people that were from FARC, from the ELN, from M19, many guerrilla groups, many students' movements, many unions. Yeah, all of this, right? I have all of this. I was this amazing story that I maybe will show you later. And he was like, but give us some context. So there's the process that I want to talk about. It's here. I had like materials, like interviews and chat logs, and I started like taking notes in tiny pieces of paper about like the process that I wanted to engage in. And yeah, like these were like my actual interviews in pieces of paper. Then I would like rewrite the stories, and I would think like, how would the layout look? And then it's not here, but I would like make curves, like graphs. It's not that I'm like a scientist, it's that I am so dumb that I need to make drawings even for when I'm writing. So I made some graphs to like interweave the stories that I had, to have like some context about the history of Colombia, to have like some to place like the wings towards like any other country that I would give. For example, I knew that I wouldn't be able to sell the book somewhere else if I didn't like make it like more global, or like talked about like some universal issues, maybe radicalization, or maybe I don't know, like some other things. So I started making that, and then I had a book that didn't ever have a script because it was like a bunch of notes and it was in constant change. Um, it was like 196 pages about like the not only the history of Colombia, but also like stories by friends, also protests, also whatever, right? So, for example, these are the pencils that I had, and then I started putting like pages with historical context, or uh, pages that looked like posters, because I wanted to give one piece of information a lot of relevance, right? And yeah, oh, and finally the lettering, which was something that I didn't think much about. And the lettering became something very important in the end, because I was like, okay, so how do I make it important if I am horrible at lettering? And I ended up like giving like different politicians different like lettering styles, and or like having different kinds of weight. This is the 9th of April. Remember the when I showed you this? This is the politician they killed in a coup. And here in the comic, I say like, I went to the CIA's website. They say they didn't do it. So yeah, and yeah, that is the actual way that the book worked. In the end, it was like 196 pages. It was published with Uncivilized Books, and yeah, that's how it went. And I am happy with it because I learned how to work without a script and in a very long project that has like a bunch of minimal stories that have to make sense. And yeah, here, oh, this is another thing. But yeah, that was my whole process. And there's there's also like the thing that I ended up doing, which is having like meta stories, like stories about the making of the book. Asking friends like, hey, is it is it I don't know, is it bad if I portray this person like this? uh am I gonna get in trouble if I do this, or if I say this? And yeah, I discovered like methods to like tell some stories that are difficult from my own point of view. Yeah, that's the process I wanted to tell you about. Oh, I paused the timer, so I guess I'm over the time. Yeah, so I don't know if you have questions or whatever, but that's my process. Thank you.
All right, and now we can move on to our next and person in this panel, our very own Angie Bonilla. For a little intro, artist, engineer, and aspiring scientist at Carnegie Mellon University. Currently, she is a research assistant in the textiles laboratory at the Carnegie Mellon Robotics Institute, working on innovative knitting machines. She is deeply passionate about comics and is exploring ways to create comics using algorithms and robotics, especially focusing on ways to improve human-robot collaboration. Some of her comics appeared in the Sun and Sand anthology by Black Jose Press in 2021. And here's our very own Angie Bonilla. She's really incredible.
Okay, hi. Hola a todos. Ya sé los que me vieron, anyone who saw me before, I was moderating the first panel and I've helped organize this. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my practice and overall sort of work. A lot of it is comics, but a lot of it is also not necessarily that. So I'm going to share my screen and display, let me see how to do this work. So, okay, espérate. Okay, so apparently I have to drag it over here. And present it over here. Yeah, I am sharing. I think I'm sharing the right screen. I don't know. Okay, this is going on the opposite direction of where I needed it to go, but oh well. Okay, so as previously mentioned, I am currently a student here at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm not as established as a lot of the people that we have here, but I want to talk a little bit about my experience in trying to find a way of intersecting my different types of interests. I grew up in Colombia. I grew up there and moved to the US very abruptly when I was 10 years old and had a lot of experiences where my mom was undocumented and we had like a lot of housing instability. So through my early works and early work during high school and stuff like that, I was trying to find a way to bridge my identity as Colombian and trying to understand what that meant. I grew up with a very conservative Colombian family in the sense that everyone was super Uribista, and the types of conversations that we had where regarding Colombian politics were not things that I was used to. And in this regard, I started asking myself questions about what this meant and how I could connect with those aspects of my heritage. And this was the first comic that I ever wrote, and it was a comic about a girl and her father, but it wasn't really related to my culture and myself. So eventually I made this comic with and during one of the business courses that I did with him. And in here I was focusing a lot of my experiences growing up in the Caribbean coast and picking chippis from the ground with my cousins. And for me, this was like a very iconic experience growing up in La Guajira, Barranquilla, and these parts of Colombia, and what those specific words and objects meant for me as a representation of family. But I still felt incredibly disconnected and disjoint from my Colombian heritage because I mean, I was fully Colombian until I wasn't. I was immediately sort of like grabbed from this place where I grew up and had my entire life. I didn't even know English. And I moved to the US and I started becoming American, and I kind of didn't really go back to Colombia. So I had a completely radical shift, and really all I had left was this mask and like this painting and this idea of like, okay, I feel like I'm faking this thing because I'm living in the US, but I'm not from here. I'm not from there. I'm not Colombian American. I'm not Colombian. I'm not American. I don't know where I am. And I think that's a lot of what I've been exploring in my practice. So I came to CMU and I started exploring a lot of things with technology, face tracking technologies, and just different types of stuff. And I started thinking a lot about what it means to have like a dialect. And hopefully I can show this in this video, but there's this project that I did in my early time here at CMU that was exploring that, like, people have told me, Angie, the way you speak Spanish has changed. And to me, that's something tragic, like hearing that like my dialect doesn't sound the same. Oh, what city from Colombia are you from? Even though I'm fluent in Spanish, there's still small changes that you can hear in the way a dialect changes. And sometimes people are like, oh, are you sure you're from Colombia? Like, you don't really sound Colombian, or you don't sound like you're from the coast. Are you sure you're from the coast, or something like that? And for me, it's like, I don't know, what can I say? I don't want to seem like I'm an imposter when I'm trying to say that I'm Colombian, but at the same time, I'm kind of stop being that. And this is a little bit of like what I've been exploring with this character. And yeah, for a long time, like, there was also the fact that my family didn't have the financial stability. My mom didn't have the documentation to be able to, like, for us to travel when I was a minor. So there was also the matter that physically I had barriers that prevented me from going back. And this is something that actually, I think a lot of people that immigrate young to the US have, especially even if they're not Colombian, like this idea of like, okay, I'm moving back, and because of political, socioeconomic, or other types of reasons, I cannot go back to my home nation. And so with this in mind, I kind of started with kind of working also with just other types of stuff. Here at CMU, we have like a very algorithmic process and a lot of technologies that we work with. And I started playing around with robots. I think they're cute. So with robots, I started finding ways in which I could get like a robot to draw something for me, and ways in which I could use patterns that were generated by robots and objects like this to try to see if I could draw on top of them and create art with the robot, because isn't that cute? Haha, I want to draw with a little robot. That sounds adorable. So these are pieces that I made where partially they were drawn by robots, where different like lines and attributes of these illustrations were actually created by algorithms that I had programmed. And I decided to draw on top of them to see what the drawings were telling me. I was like, yeah, what's the image behind this? And I was like, oh, it kind of looks like a tree. So I'm going to draw a tree. And it was just more of an algorithmic exploration, but these became illustrations that to me became like representative of something, a starting point. I started becoming really interested in the idea of like, okay, maybe starting with this one. I became really interested in the idea of like, how can I use these illustrations and these patterns to try to actually build a story and build a comic? Because the logical progression of making an image is to make a series of images, and a series of images with words is a comic. And so with that in mind, I started playing with ideas of like, it kind of looks like a galaxy. I'm going to make a story about a girl and her space, and this idea of space and places cohabitating. So eventually I was like, okay, maybe I won't draw on top of the comic, and I'll try to see if I can make a comic that like speaks by itself. And these were comics that used some sort of machine learning algorithms and other types of image processing algorithms that started applying these like attributes and trying to see if I could make a progressive sort of piece of like illustrated comic stories. I am still sort of working with these ideas. This is more kind of like the place where my practice is going. So it's an exploration that's still in progress, but it's sort of like what's in my mind. And this is sort of a piece in the similar vein that I was like scraping and using kind of like web scraping technologies to try finding images from historical pictures of Colombia. So these are all historical photos of Colombia that were processed in different ways to try to create these snapshots of history and memory. And I'm really interested in this idea of like translating images from the past into the future and building these objects as spaces. And I don't know, I find it really interesting and cool. And within that, despite the fact that, right, I'm not living in Latin America, I still want to be engaged with the types of themes that I see in Latin America. I'm really passionate about like feminism, and I want to know that as anyone who is relatively aware of the things that are occurring in Latin America, there have been a series of protests since 2020 against rape and violence, and this is particularly based from street performance by Colectivo Las Tesis called El Violador Eres Tú, where women essentially go into the street and they protest against various men's politicians and state leaders who are working with this. And I wanted to see if there was a way that I could reproduce these images and pay homage to the works that are being done by these women that I admire, that I can't be physically protesting with them, but I want to be protesting with them in spirit. And I use the technologies that I've been building with this idea of like having a robot draw these things for me, and this idea that I could actually kind of create etching plates and manually create these etchings and turn them back into these reproducible video objects that kind of place them in the same space as a fine art object, which to me is really important because I want to elevate those types of performances to the state that I find different types of art. And so my mind is kind of in this political space, but I know that I don't have the political voice to be able to speak to the level that like someone who's living there is, but I'm still finding my own way to be able to explore these types of topics. So similarly, as a Caribbean person, I've been also exploring a lot of the ideas of what it means to be from the Colombian Caribbean. The Colombian Caribbean has had a lot of interesting political history regarding the agricultural aspect of like, particularly banana cultivation. So what does it mean to be someone from the Colombian Caribbean coast, where there's this history of agricultural oppression, where in essence we have built this kind of like system where there's political infrastructures and like capitalistic things that have harmed the way in which environments grow in like Colombia, and this idea of like the traditional Caribbean spirits in this region, the way that they can interact. So I made this video piece, kind of like, I don't animate, but I tried to do something that was kind of like that homage to this type of work. So I wanted to make a comic, but it was like a video class, so this is kind of what ended up being there.
Espíritu de la Espíritu, 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 Espíritu. Tengo que abrirte. Tengo que abrirte. Espíritu del agua, Espíritu del agua. Yo soy un negro, morado.
And this kind of general vein of work of just exploring this Caribbean identity has still persisted, okay, through my kind of works. And right now there's like a project that I'm working with, trying to, okay, so this one right here is kind of a piece in the similar vein of this idea of trying to like connect this experience that I have with technology with also my Caribbean identity. I had this robot and I wanted to dance cumbia with this robot. So this is like a piece in the similar vein where I'm breaking up with this robot because we had like a really intimate relationship, but it wasn't able to dance with me. So we have like this difficult conversation and we break up.
Todas las expectativas, mis ambiciones que consumen cada parte. Pero yo te di todo. Te di todas las mis lágrimas, mi fe, mi dolor, mi y en ese momento, lo mismo que quise ocurrir. Tú y yo compartimos una justicia, unas ideas, un entendimiento. Pero me di cuenta que volar es una
So to me, this was a little bit of a funny video. I was like venting out my rage at this robot and I was tired of like telling it to, fuck itself. So I decided to break up with it instead. Very normal reaction if you ask me. Anyone who's ever worked with like finicky technology would understand probably. But I think since then I've been still in this idea of like, I'm tired of technology. I'm tired of coding. This university makes you code a lot and I'm sick of it. So I think within myself, I'm trying to find a place where I can like, I've been thinking a lot about home spaces, right? My family kind of had to very abruptly move here. My mom also just got out of a period of like long-term homelessness and we finally were able to buy a house. So I've been in this idea of building the perfect home space for my family and building an actual home for them and thinking about the objects that actually existed in my Colombian household when I was growing up. This idea of like everyone's obsession with the Virgin Mary and finding ways in which I could create these objects. And so with my experiences in the textile lab and working with computational machine knitting, I've been creating pieces that relate these elements of my Caribbean Colombian household into physical illustrated objects that, although it's not comics, it's still in the space of like these physical objects that live in a space and represent these computational processes that I also explore in my own comics and graphic objects. And so I've been making these paintings, illustrations, and things like that that eventually will become this space of like this Colombian household. And I wanted to kind of make them into a complete room and where people would be able to sit in a completely knit chair with all these knit objects. And there was like an actual element of like the house that I grew up in. And I was able to do so. This is from my solo show that I had relatively recently in the Ellis Gallery. And I was able to kind of show these objects together. And recently, the scenes that have been going around are little comics about my experiences in Colombia and the little songs and like things that I would tell myself and my mom. So these are the objects that have been going around in the room, in the physical kind of space. And you can also see them in my website and also like in the exhibit for the archive, where that include these types of stories. Okay, I know that I probably went over, but thank you so much.
Open the for questions and we give you a moment to think about those questions. Just a reminder that our friends from Colombian have hot chocolate, Colombian coffee, and Colombian chocolate, and the ones maybe they're gone. And we'll have some empanadas coming out very soon. Also, a reminder that right after this, we'll have a short break, and then we'll have our bilingual conversatorio roundtable. Fun for many of the artists, scholars, creators, etc., will be joining us in a hybrid space, physically and online, and we'll end up with some short remarks, also known as fiesta, like that. Anyways, if we have questions, please raise your hands. Questions for Catalina right here, questions for Auntie right here, or questions for Camilo?
Maybe it's better if we all go up.
Yeah.
So that like, that way we can be here and you guys have questions for us. And also please come up if you want to talk so that we can also be with our like online audience.
Wait, Camilo, you can unmute. Do you on your like video of us, do you see like the audience right now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So like if anyone has a question, just so Camilo can hear, you can also just come up and be face to face as much as you can on Zoom.
Can I ask Catalina? Can you talk about your experiences with running a small business actually, or like how that can be?
For sure. So when I was really little, I started drawing. I was like at summer camp, and they're like, "Man, you're really good at drawing. You're drawing this, we're drawing this." I'm like, "Everybody, this is too much. I'm gonna start a quarter. That's how you gotta pay me." And then I'd get like 75 cents. I go to the section, I buy whatever I wanted. And then I had like eventually I had like $5, and I bought model magic clay, like air dry clay. And I started making little clay doggy figurines, and people would buy them from my school or my mom's coworkers supported me. eventually I had like $50 and I bought markers, things, and I would make designs and I would draw on shirts. I bought some fabric markers and shirts. Started selling those, and then in 2011, I started an Etsy to sell online. That was when Etsy like just became like a thing. But since then, I've made my own website, and it's just grown from there. But I also went to school for business because I was like, oh, I've been working on art for so long. I think I know how to do that, but I want to learn more about business. A lot of times in this situation, I can get taken advantage of. So I was like, let me learn that side of things. And I did that, and it was not my passion, not exactly, but nothing goes to waste. I learned a lot for sure, and it's continuing to do that. And I want to make art accessible to everyone. So I have some very like higher end pieces I would work months on, and then I also sell prints for very low, so people everyone can have art. Yeah. And I encourage other people to share their work and also sell it and have their own. Yeah.
Sí, sí.
Very interesting in the medium, focus as a medium, but you have experimented a lot, what you've shown us. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of your experimentation with algorithms, right? What are some of the possibilities, besides the specific content, then you can put different contents based on your experiences, but so for the medium, what potential do you see, what changes do you see on the use of algorithms for comics in comparison to other formats, ways to do comics?
I think, like you said, I think that the content will, in a way, and like anything, I think that AI systems and let's say algorithmic systems only propose different types of questions. The way that I'm personally approaching algorithms as a way of approaching comics is more about like what actually makes a comic and the idea of using form as a way of inspiring the story. I mean, it's more of a challenge of like this idea of like generating an image is not easy. It's actually kind of hard, especially if you're not using something like GANs or something like that, which are the kind of the more commonly known like image generation things. But it's hard to try to make a sequential narrative that makes sense with stories that kind of are continuous. And I'm not saying this like as a response to the kind of conversations that are going on around with the idea of like stealing art, because the type of art that I make is very disjoint from that. I'm using very small data sets, and I'm the type of person who will collect the images myself and will deeply engage with the models and systems that I'm working with. So for me, it's an exploration of form and space. I'm interested in this idea of like, okay, what's a comic at its core? How do I make these compositions? I mean, all the decisions that we make when we make comics are very, 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 very deliberate. I mean, you might not think of it as an artist. I think there's a lot of people in this room who have probably had experiences making comics. So when you're making a composition or something like that, you're just like, it just feels right? But how do you make it sure that a comic that is being randomly done feels right? Or how do you make sure that like a particular panel transition feels right? So for me, it's more of like a exploration in terms of a format and model, because I find it interesting. And I think that algorithms have a way of being able to tell us things that are not always directly seen into the eyes. We can see things that data structures and like are able to identify, for instance, usage of certain particular types of words or particular thematic systems that exist behind it. I think taking it as upfront and being like, hey, this thing's gonna make a comic for me is bad, because, for instance, maybe you might not be able to directly engage with the type of systems that you're working with, but if you're able to say it, like, can you tell me more about the underlying structures that I might not be able to see? Then like these algorithms and AI systems are able to speak to you more from the perspective of like, these are actually the biases that exist under these systems, or this is actually what it means for a comic to be there. And there's a lot of people that are meaningfully engaging with this content. And I find that type of conversation really meaningful. So I'm interested in figuring out how to do that. But I think it's a very difficult conversation to have right now, because there's not a lot of education on like the difference between what I'm doing and things like AI and just people stealing other people's works and calling it their own. So
So with AI helping you with panels, and with something like ChatGPT created for being able to generate text, and generate transitions, what is the future role in your opinion of someone like you?
I mean, I think people can use them as tools like anything else. I think any technology, if used right and meaningfully, can serve as a way of being able to engage future artwork. I don't use ChatGPT, and I use more actually like very simple models like Markov chains, which I'm directly working with the input that I'm giving it. Like one of the projects that I was working with was using different types of articles written in English about Colombian, about like essentially like articles about the banana massacres and figuring out the underlying language structures that existed in the way that American media spoke about banana massacres. So it was information that I directly sourced, and I didn't present that work, but it's all articles that I sourced and that I found and that I wanted to understand why these people were using these particular sets of words and what the images and pictures related to those things were. That's a very different thing than just saying to ChatGPT to write me a comic. But if we have a conversation about like, what are the underlying models that ChatGPT are being trained on? Why are we prefacing particular words like this to be able to generate these types of things? Those invoke different conversations around the technology that we're making. So I think it's all about the way in which you engage with the technology and you engage meaningfully with the types of models that it is. When something like ChatGPT, like if I'm training a markup chain, I'm training it. If someone is using ChatGPT that was trained by a gigantic corporation where they predatorily source information from different online systems, it's a very different conversation about the underlying technology that you're working with. So I don't know, I guess that the future can be like, as long as people are able to meaningfully use them and work with that, with the knowledge about the systems that they're using, I don't think there's an issue, but it's a complex conversation.
Do you know if we have questions online? I have a question for Camilo. Can you hear us, Camilo? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So part of the conversation that we were having with Angie and Catalina had to do with their experience growing up in connection to Colombia, but also as a kind of hybrid or multi kind of hybrid experience, right? Of being and not being Colombian, or in the case of Catalina, also Chinese, and also American, and in the case of Angie, also being from Miami. And in your case, when you came here to the US, Camilo, what did that produce in your sense of Colombianness, and how did that come through your art, or did it?
I don't know, to be honest, how to answer to that. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like living in Colombia this much time has allowed me to be very self-deprecating with Colombia and very critical with it. But in comparison to the US, which is like this huge power, I still like understand like the global inequalities that are there between both countries. As for my identity, I don't know. I don't know if I should bring the question to my like to the personal field, but since I'm back, I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's very hard in here for to make art, to make a living out of comics. There's still like a tiny ray of hope with our current administration change, but I don't feel like, I feel maybe we will achieve something and the next day we will be underwater. That's it.
Yeah, I do actually have one from the live chat. And yeah, for anyone watching on the live stream, if you have any questions, you can just leave them in the chat and I'll be looking at it and giving the presenters the question. But this one's for Angie. Question is from Cindy Infante Saavedra. And they write, I'm curious about Angie's position about the debate on AI on creating images. How do you manage with limits?
Yeah, I think that's like such a complex conversation because, right, I work with technology and it's kind of a similar thing with like, so I think the debate that Cindy is referring to is the idea of like essentially using like GANs and like particularly like largely sourced GANs like Midjourney or DALI, which are like essentially generating these like massive and really realistic images that might be actually predatorily sourcing from artists online. I don't like to engage with that type of stuff in the work that I make myself. And in fact, that like a lot of the stuff that I was working with machine learning systems was like way before, and I trained those systems myself on like things that I wrote. So although I'm using algorithms, a lot of it is actually using like randomness directly to generate these images. Like I am getting all these like images online from particular queries that I'm doing on like articles that I know that I'm engaging with. And I'm processing those directly. I'm not using AI systems, with the exception of the one time that I used Markov chains, which are a very limited type of like model that I trained on information that I knew that I had sourced. Training AI models is an incredibly laborious process where if you're doing it because you're making the artwork, can take a very long time. There's an artist called Helena Sarin who has been working a lot with machine like GANs and generative images, who quite literally like she takes the photos of every single one of the images that she's feeding into these systems to be able to generate these images. And it can be an incredibly laborious process where you can actually be talking about the idea of like how much labor it takes to be able to do this. Something that I want everyone to understand about when we're talking about these like AI systems is that there is an underlying labor force that is leading to these image generations, which is the fact that they have thousands upon thousands of people who are like in these Amazon warehouses, literally labeling these images for them to be adequately trained into these AI models. So there is actual labor politics where people are getting like paid a cent the image that they're doing. So, and these are usually people in third world countries who are trying to get paid by the dollar. So when we're talking about AI systems and talking about the like labor etiquette and building these things, we need to understand that like if you're using a model where you're just using either like ChatGPT, you're using all of these things, they're all trained on systems that are done by corporations. They're not done by like the average artist, and someone who is genuinely engaging with what it means to be working with AI will be sourcing their information by themselves. I think that the complex conversation that requires a level of like literacy on the subject that unfortunately I don't think that we have as a society, but we should get towards. So I don't know, I didn't want to talk about technology and make this conversation about that, but I think that when I'm talking about my work, I'm not someone who's engaging with AI art, but when you do talk about it, I think there's ways to be ethical about it and definitely ways to be unethical about it. And we can't talk about this without talking about the fact that these models take labor to be able to make. So
I think we can leave it there. Thank you very much, Camilo. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Catalina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Santi, for moderating. Help yourself, please, to the food and beverages, and we'll resume in about 15 minutes for the conversatorio. Camilo, si te quieres quedar ahí, quédate. Si necesitas levantarte
Okay.
un rato, levántate y ahorita nos vemos.
I apagué.
All right.
Gracias.
Gracias.